There's someone in your life you'd do almost anything for. Maybe it's a friend who always seems to be in crisis. Maybe it's a partner who needs saving from themselves. Maybe it's a coworker who can never quite manage without your help. And you show up every time because that's just who you are, right? You're the dependable one, the strong one, the one who cares enough to actually do something. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the very thing you believe is protecting people you love might actually be keeping them trapped and quietly destroying you in the process. Here's what nobody talks about. The person doing all the rescuing is often the one who needs the most help. Not because they're weak, but because something deep in them decided at some point that their worth was conditional. That love had to be earned through service. That if they stopped being useful, they might stop being needed. And if they stopped being needed, they might disappear entirely from the lives of the people they care about most. That's the real paradox at the center of what psychologists call the white knight syndrome. It's not about being generous. Generosity feels free. This feels compulsive. It's not about being kind. Kindness comes from a full cup. This comes from a wound. The white knight, in psychological terms, is someone who chronically rescues others, not out of pure altruism, but out of an unconscious need to feel worthy, in control, or indispensable. And the harder they work to save everyone around them, the more they lose themselves. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote something that stopped me cold when I first read it. She said, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Not action, not intervention, not fixing. Attention, real presence, which means that all the doing, all the solving, all the swooping in to save the day might actually be the opposite of genuine generosity. It might be a way of not truly seeing the other person at all." That's uncomfortable. I know, but stay with it. Because here's what the conventional approach to this problem looks like and why it makes everything worse. Society rewards the white knight. We celebrate the person who sacrifices sleep to help a friend through a breakup at 2 a.m. We admire the one who puts their own needs last. We call it devotion. We call it loyalty. We hand out gold stars for self-erasure. And so the white knight learns over and over again that their pattern is not just acceptable, but virtuous. They double down. They give more. They help harder. And the resentment builds quietly underneath, invisible even to themselves, until one day it isn't. Let's go deeper, because this doesn't happen by accident. There's a concept in developmental psychology called the anxious attachment style. It was first mapped by the researcher John Bowlby in the 1950s and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth through what became known as the strange situation experiments. What they found was that children who grew up with inconsistent caregivers, parents who were sometimes warm and sometimes unavailable, learned a particular survival strategy. They learned to be hypervigilant, to monitor the emotional temperature of the room constantly, to make themselves useful, charming, needed, so that the caregiver wouldn't withdraw. Love for these children was not a given. It was a performance, and the performance never really ended. If you recognize yourself in that description, I want to say something clearly. This is not your fault. You were a child doing the only thing that made sense with what you had. But the problem is that most of us carry that strategy into adulthood without ever examining it. We find partners who need saving. We attract friendships built around our usefulness. We build entire identities on being the reliable one, and we wonder why we're exhausted all the time. There's also something called the helper's high. Research published in journals studying altruistic behavior confirms that helping others genuinely does trigger a dopamine response in the brain. It feels good. There's a warmth, a sense of purpose, a momentary relief from your own anxiety when you're focused on solving someone else's problem. A study from the University of Michigan found that people who reported feeling needed by others had lower rates of depression. And there's nothing wrong with that on its surface. But here's where it gets complicated. When helping becomes a coping mechanism, when it's the primary way you manage your own anxiety, or your fear of not being enough, it stops being generosity and starts being self-medication. The other person becomes, without either of you realizing it, a vehicle for your own emotional regulation. You need them to need you. Which means, at some level, you have a subconscious interest in their problems not being fully solved. Sit with that for a second. There's a metaphor I keep coming back to. Imagine you're on a boat with someone who's struggling to stay afloat. The rescuer instinct says, jump in, pull them out, save them. But if you jump in without a plan, you can both drown. The lifeguard's training, the actual professional approach, is counterintuitive. You don't swim directly to the drowning person. You bring something for them to grab. You help them help themselves. Because a panicking person will grab anything, including you, and pull you under. The white knight jumps in every time, and they're always a little surprised when they're the one gasping for air. Now let's talk about what's really going on underneath this, because I think we need to name something uncomfortable before we can move past it. Carl Jung had a concept he called the shadow. The parts of ourselves we've disowned, the drives and desires we've decided are unacceptable, and so we've hidden them, not in a drawer somewhere, but in the basement of our psyche, where they run quietly in the background, influencing everything. For the white knight, the shadow often contains things like anger, resentment, a deep, unspoken wish to sometimes be the one who is taken care of, a fear that they are, at core, selfish, which is why they work so hard to prove they aren't. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The exhaustion that the white knight feels, and if you've been in this pattern, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That bone-deep depletion after giving and getting little back, that's not just physical tiredness. It's what happens when the real self and the performed self are in constant conflict. When who you actually are and who you've decided you must be are pulling in opposite directions, it takes an enormous amount of energy just to hold that tension together. And there's one more piece of this that rarely gets talked about. The white knight isn't just exhausted. They're often also quietly controlling. This one's hard to hear. I know because I've had to hear it myself. When you rescue someone, you make a decision on their behalf. You decide they can't handle this alone. You decide your way of solving the problem is correct. You take agency away from them while believing you're giving it. The psychologist Harriet Lerner, in her book The Dance of Anger, describes this dynamic with painful precision. She writes about how the person who functions as the overfunctioner in a relationship is almost always paired with someone who underfunctions, and each one enables the other to stay stuck. The overfunctioner gets to feel competent and needed. The underfunctioner is relieved of the pressure to grow. The system reaches a kind of equilibrium that looks like helping, but is actually a form of mutual stagnation. Real help, genuine help, is often the kind that makes you feel unnecessary. So how do we reframe this? How do we step out of a pattern that feels so deeply woven into who we are that it's almost indistinguishable from our character? Here's where I want to bring in Erich Fromm, because I think he offers something essential. In his book, The Art of Loving, Fromm makes a distinction that changed how I think about care. He separates what he calls symbiotic love from mature love. Symbiotic love, whether through domination or submission, is love where two people need each other in a way that makes this less free. Neither one can grow without threatening the relationship. Mature love, in Fromm's framing, is entirely different. He writes, love is the active concern for the life and the growth of that which we love. Active concern, not active management, not active rescue. Concern. For the life and the growth. Not for the comfort or the stability or the avoidance of pain, but for the genuine flourishing, which sometimes looks like letting someone sit in their difficulty long enough to find their own way through. The Stoics had a concept that connects here, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, who was a former slave, built his entire philosophy around one distinction. Some things are up to us, some things are not. Our opinions, our impulses, our values, up to us. Other people's choices, their pain, their growth, their decisions, not up to us. The white knight, at some fundamental level, refuses to accept this boundary. They act as if other people's inner lives are within their sphere of control, and they exhaust themselves trying to manage what was never theirs to manage. Viktor Frankl, writing from the shadow of the Holocaust, made a related observation. He said that one of the deepest forms of human suffering comes from taking responsibility for things we cannot control and abandoning responsibility for things we can. The white knight is doing exactly this, taking on the emotional and practical weight of other people's lives, neglecting their own. Here's the reframe in its simplest form. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness. Your love is not measured by your sacrifice. And the most profound thing you can offer another person is not your rescue. It's your presence, your honesty, and your trust in their capacity to figure things out. That last part is the one we skip. Trust in their capacity. When you constantly intervene, you're sending a message, usually unconscious, that says, I don't think you can handle this. Even when it feels like love, it can land as a subtle diminishment, and the people in your life, the ones you most want to protect, often feel it. They feel the weight of being the reason someone else is suffering. And that can be its own kind of burden. Now, I want to be careful here. None of this means you stop caring. None of this means you become cold or withholding, or watch people struggle without offering a hand. There is genuine altruism in the world. There is real generosity that comes from strength, not from fear. The question is not, should I help, but why am I helping, and how? Let me offer you something concrete. The first thing is a question, not an action. The next time you feel that pull, that almost magnetic urgency to jump in and fix something for someone else, pause for just a moment and ask yourself honestly, am I doing this because it will genuinely help them, or because I can't tolerate the discomfort of watching them struggle? This isn't a gotcha question. It's a genuine inquiry. Sometimes the answer is both. Sometimes it's the first one. But naming which one is operating in the moment changes everything. The second practice, and this one's harder, is learning to say, I believe in you, instead of, let me handle it. This is not a passive move. It's actually a more active and more demanding form of love. It requires you to hold the discomfort of watching someone you care about navigate difficulty without stepping in. It requires you to trust them. And that trust, when it's genuine, communicates something far more nourishing than any rescue could. It says, I see you as capable. I see you as whole. I'm here, but this is yours. The third thing, and perhaps the most personally important, is to turn some of that rescuing energy back toward yourself. What needs in you have gone unmet because you've been so focused on meeting everyone else's? This is not a selfish question. It is the foundational question. Because the research on caregiver burnout, and there is substantial research on this, shows consistently that the people who are most effective at supporting others over the long term are the ones who have developed a robust practice of tending to their own inner life. Not as an afterthought, as a priority. I won't pretend this is easy. Knowing something intellectually is genuinely different from living it. The pull toward rescuing can feel as involuntary as breathing, and the people around you may not immediately respond well to the shift. When someone who has always jumped in starts to step back, it can feel like abandonment, both to them and to you. The discomfort is real. But here's something I've come to believe, and I hold it with some humility because I know it's not the final word. The people in your life who are worth growing with are the ones who, given space and trust and honest presence, will rise to meet it. Not all of them, not immediately. But the relationship that's built on your overfunctioning is a relationship that requires you to stay small to maintain it. And you are not meant to stay small. Aristotle talked about eudaimonia, the Greek word often translated as happiness, but more accurately meaning something like the fullness of a well-lived life. the flourishing that comes from living in alignment with your deepest nature and virtues. He didn't think this was a passive state. He thought it required engagement, courage, and what he called philia, a kind of friendship and love grounded in mutual respect and genuine care for each other's good. Not service, not rescue, mutual respect. And you cannot have that in a relationship where one person is always the helper and the other is always the helped. There's a line from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke that I come back to more than almost anything else. He wrote in his Letters to a Young Poet that perhaps all the love we feel is something we are learning how to practice, that we are only at the very beginning of understanding what it means to love well. I find that both humbling and strangely hopeful, because it means we don't have to have gotten it right. It means the work of unlearning is also a form of learning, that the recognition of the pattern is already a step outside it. If you've been carrying the weight of other people's lives on your shoulders for a long time, I want to say something to you directly. You are not obligated to earn your place in this world through exhaustion. The people who truly love you don't need you to save them. They need you to be present, to be honest, to be sometimes vulnerable enough to say, I need something too. That might be the bravest thing a white knight can do. Put down the armor. Not permanently, not carelessly, but long enough to remember what it feels like to just be a person. This topic sits inside a much bigger conversation about identity, self-worth, and how we learn to love ourselves and others without losing ourselves in the process. If that's the kind of conversation you want more of, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. And I'm genuinely curious. What's one relationship in your life where you've been overfunctioning? And what do you think would happen if you offered trust instead of rescue? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Rilke again to close. Once the realization is accepted that even between the closest human beings, infinite distances continue, a wonderful living side by side can grow if they succeed in loving the distance between them. Love the distance, trust the space, and let people be the authors of their own stories.